Quest for the West by Peter Kent. Quest for the West in search of gold. Let's see what's inside. So this is the Hornick's journey. Bohemia to California, 11,000 kilometers. Quest for the West. Table of contents and some pictures. It's kind of a long introduction, but I'll shorten it. So apart from the Native Americans, everyone in the United States is either an immigrant or descended from immigrants. In the 17th and 18th century, people emigrated in only very small numbers out to America. But they speed up, and one big thing is the gold rush. Even though the journey to California was difficult and dangerous, the lure of gold was so strong that in 3 years the population rose from 15,000 to 250,000. Very few people got rich by finding gold, but they soon realized that California was a beautiful and fertile land. Most gold seekers settled down to a less exciting, but in the end, more prosperous way of life. And here's who we're following. This book tells the story of one of the millions of families who made the long and hard journey from Europe to America. They are Thomas Hornick, his wife Martina, and their children, Agnieszka, Peter, and Tonda. They lived in Bohemia, which is now part of the Czech Republic. Hornick means miner in the Czech language. So let's see what happens. Stage 1, Bohemia. In 1849, life was hard in Bohemia. The year before, a revolution had been crushed. The people were busy marching everywhere and arresting suspects. The police were busy marching everywhere and arresting suspects in every village. Harvests were scanty and work in the lead mines was dirty, dangerous, and badly paid. The peasants were hungry and miserable. Yeah, you don't want to work down there. The Hornick family lived in a small village in the mountains. Thomas was a miner. His wife Martina and their children Peter, Agnieszka, and Tonda. They had heard of America, where good land was cheap, where taxes were low, where all men were equal, and where there was no dukes and barons sitting proudly in their castles. One day, a newspaper arrived. It told of an exciting discovery in California. Gold had been found. There, men were becoming fabulously rich overnight. "I shall go," cried Thomas. "I won't stay here digging lead and being poor. I shall go to California to dig for gold and become rich." "We all come too," said everyone. "We'll all go west." While the villagers talked, a passing thief crept into the church and stole the golden crown from the statue of the Virgin Mary. Stage 2. The next day, all the rest of the villagers had changed their minds, but Thomas was determined. While he dug up the family savings, Martina sold the furniture and her best shawl. Peter sold pots of pickled gherkins, and Agnieszka took her pig to the market. Then Thomas borrowed an atlas from a schoolmaster, and they planned their epic trek west. The first stage was a journey to Linz in Austria on the famous railway from Český Budějovice. The line had been built to take barrels of salt to barges on the river Danube. At one time, it was the longest railway in Europe, and all the carriages were pulled by horses, even after steam engines were invented. To save money, the Hornicks took the cheapest tickets. This meant sitting on the roof of the train and being battered by wind and rain. When they got to Linz, they transferred to a salt barge and sailed up the river Danube to Ulm in Germany. From there, they took a coach to Karlsruhe, which I'm sure I'm mispronouncing, where they boarded another riverboat and sailed all the way down the River Rhine to Rotterdam in Holland. Stage 3. Rotterdam. At last the Hornets reached Rotterdam, the great port. From there, ships sailed to America and all over the world. The docks were crowded with sailors of every nation, the warehouses crammed with cargoes. Thomas paid $50 for their tickets. The Hornets had never seen the sea before because they had never traveled outside Bohemia. Thomas had lots to ask the sailors about the long voyage. "Will the sea be rough?" he asked nervously. "As smooth as glass," lied the sailors. You can see them putting all the goods in the ships for the long journey. Uh-oh. Stage 4. The Atlantic Ocean. In 1849, most emigrants to America crossed the Atlantic Ocean in sailing ships. There were steamships, but their fares were expensive. A typical sailing ship like the one the Hornets boarded weighed about 800 tons and carried about 300 passengers. The voyage took about 30 days if the weather was good. First-class passengers had a saloon and individual cabins. The second and third-class passengers slept in bunks and hammocks in the dark and smelly holds. There were often chickens aboard and a cow to provide fresh milk. There were very few rules about the safety of ships at the time. Some were so unsafe they were called coffin ships, but greedy ship owners went on using them. In one year, 1852, 70 ships sank, and over 3,000 passengers and crew were drowned. Yeah, so there's the cow for the milk. Whew, that looks tricky. Stage 5, New York. After terrible storms and 33 days at sea, poor Aneshka was seasick on every single one. The ship sailed into New York Harbor and tied up at the pier on Manhattan Island. Most of the passengers staggered off to find rooms and jobs in the city, but the Hornets were determined to head west. They discovered that the train for Pennsylvania left from the other side of the Hudson River. There were no bridges or tunnels in those days, and everybody and everything crossed the river by ferry. Even railway goods wagons were floated across on barges. A typical ferry could be driven from either end so that it never had to waste time turning around. It was propelled by paddle wheels that were powered by steam engines. Look at that. At the time, the Hudson River was the busiest waterway in the world, and it was a very dangerous one, especially in fog. The river had other hazards. The rival ferry captains had a nasty habit of trying to sink one another. That's no good. Stage 6, New York to Pennsylvania. In 1849, there was no railway running right across America from coast to coast. The railway from New York only went as far as Harrisburg in Pennsylvania. American trains were very different from those that the Hornets had seen in Europe. The carriages were bigger and more comfortable. They had to be. The journeys were very long. The locomotives looked very odd, too. They had balloon smokestacks to catch sparks thrown up by the logs, burnt as fuel. The cowcatcher was attached to the front of the train to sweep away any animals that wandered onto the unfenced tracks. Oh no, looks like it's a beaver there. Even a small animal could derail a train and cause the most terrible accident. At one point, the locomotive ran out of fuel, and all the passengers had to get out and help the driver to cut some more wood. It's a good thing it doesn't burn coal, said Thomas. Otherwise, I'd have to go down and mine again. See, there he is, cutting the wood. How come he's not cutting any wood? Stage 7. Pennsylvania to Cincinnati. The railway ended in Harrisburg. The Hornicks needed to get to Cincinnati on the Ohio River, where they could board a steamboat to take them further west. The only way to get there was by stagecoach over the Allegheny Mountains to Columbus, where they would find another railway. They passed through the land where settlements were only 40 years old. The country looked very wild and new. Every building was made of wood. Even the road was made of logs, which made the stagecoach ride a teeth-rattling one. Roads like this were called corduroy roads. The stagecoach stopped at inns along the way and changed the horses and to let the travelers have their meals. Martina learned to speak a few words of English, and Thomas learned to chew and spit tobacco. Don't learn to do that. You shouldn't do that. It's the Wild West way, he explained. We're not in Bohemia now. That doesn't mean you should do it. But there they are. Stage 8. Cincinnati to St. Joseph. There were no good roads or railways in the Midwest of America, but there were wide rivers. In Cincinnati, the Hornicks booked a passage on a river steamboat. Their destination was St. Joseph, Missouri, and starting point for the westward trek across the plains. To get there, they would have to sail down the Ohio River, up the Mississippi, and then along the Missouri. The river steamers had flat bottoms and could sail in very shallow water. They were propelled by giant paddle wheels set either along the sides of the boat or in the stern. This steamer weighed 330 tons and can carry 225 passengers as well as many tons of freight. The cost of a ticket depended on how comfortable you wanted to be. A sleeping cabin cost $20, a place on deck, $3. The Hornicks slept on deck. Why can't we have a cabin, moaned Aneshka. Because we're poor, said Thomas. That night, Peter dreamed of a gold nugget as big as a comfortable bed. See them throwing the wood in the fire to run the steam engine? Stage 9. St. Joseph to Sacramento. St. Joseph was the start of a 3,000-kilometer walk across the continent. The Hornicks were among 40,000 people who set out for California in 1849. They bought a covered wagon and a team of oxen. They packed the wagon with all the things they needed. Together with other travelers, they formed a company, drew up rules, elected a captain, and hired a guide. Then they set out across the wild, treeless plains, where only millions of buffalo and a few Native Americans lived. Only the sick rode in the wagons. Everyone else walked all the way. It was very hard. The track was soon marked by a long line of broken wagons, abandoned equipment, dead animals, and shallow graves. The crossing of the Rocky and Sierra Nevada mountains was the most dangerous part of the journey. Nobody dared to try during the winter. One party was trapped by the snow in the Sierras and only survived by eating the flesh of those who died. Oh boy. Stage 10. After a long and grueling journey of 5 months, the Hornicks staggered down from the mountains into Sacramento. This is in California. But by the time they arrived, all the best places for finding gold had already been claimed. They were too late. "It's all been for nothing," wailed Thomas. Then Martina realized that all the miners were too busy frantically digging to have time to cook. She was a very good cook, and she opened a restaurant. The miners loved her bread dumplings, and they paid her for them with little paper twists full of gold dust. And then Thomas saw that he could use his wagon to carry supplies of food, tools, and wood to the gold fields. So the Hornicks did find riches in California after all, but not in the way they dreamed. And their great-great-great-great-grandchildren still live and prosper there in California, in the far west. So, the little restaurant is now a big diner, and there's the wagon, but now they've replaced it with trucks, and they still live in California. And that was their journey from Bohemia to California. And I hope you've enjoyed this. And bye-bye.